We're here at the Chicago Field Museum of Natural History. The museum started collecting their specimens at the 1893 World Fair, and $1 million was donated to them by a man named Marshall Field. The museum itself was open to the public in 1921, and since then they've collected over 40 million specimens and artifacts. Now, if you have a chance to visit Chicago, be sure to stop at the Field Museum so you too can see living history. Sadly, inside this building are some of the last known specimens of animals that recently went extinct. Extinction didn't just stop with the dinosaurs and the Ice Age animals. This is something that's happening to this day. And today we're going to look at 5 animals who went extinct in the last couple of decades. We're going to pay homage to those animals who will never walk the earth again. Our number 5 spot goes to a bird who numbered in the billions just 150 years ago. This is the passenger pigeon, also known as Ectopistes migratorius. Their closest living relative today is the mourning dove. Passenger pigeon comes from the French term of passing by. Passenger pigeons before the 1850s numbered 2 to 3 billion. These flocks were so heavy that they would block out the sun, deafen the area, and send people running for shelter. A flock of passenger pigeons could last 2 to 3 hours, but according to John James Audubon, the flock that he saw lasted 3 days. Passenger pigeons were so abundant that people didn't think that hunting them would do anything to damage their numbers. Hunters and trappers would arrive by the dozens by train in order to shoot them, net them, and even asphyxiate them with burning sulfur. Passenger pigeons were considered a cheap food source for slaves and were sold by the barrelful for their cheap meat and their down. One of the reasons why the passenger pigeon went extinct was because of the late passing of the Lacey Law. The Lacey Law was passed in 1900 and was one of the first conservation laws to be passed in the United States. This law prohibited the trade of wildlife, fish, and plants to be illegally obtained. Now, unfortunately, when the law was passed, the passenger pigeon only existed by the handful in managed care. The last wild passenger pigeon was shot in 1900, was mounted, stuffed, and was named Buttons due to the buttons in his eyes. The passenger pigeon played a religious role for some North American native tribes. The Wyandot people believed that the souls of the dead changed in the passenger pigeons. The Ho-Chunk people considered the passenger pigeon to be the bird of the chief, and the Seneca people developed a pigeon dance as a way of showing their gratitude and respect to the pigeon. At 1 p.m. on September 1st, 1914, in a Cincinnati zoo, the very last passenger pigeon died. Her name was Martha. Unfortunately, passenger pigeons can only breed well in large groups. And because of that, Martha went her entire life not laying a single fertile egg. Now, when Martha died, so did an entire species of bird that once numbered in the billions. Although they look like northern grizzly bears, our number 4 spot is actually their own subspecies. They're known as the Mexican grizzly bear, the silver bear, or Ursus arctos nelsoni. They were the heaviest and largest mammals in Mexico. Due to their silvery fur, they were nicknamed the silver bear. Their range spanned from northern territories of Mexico to Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. They were omnivores like all bears, and they ate meat, fruit, plants, and insects. The bears were discovered in the 16th century by Francisco Vázquez de Coronado when he went on an expedition from Mexico City on north. When farming began in Mexico, farmers considered the bears as pests, and they began shooting them, trapping them, and poisoning them. In the 1930s, they were scarce and few and only lived on 3 different mountain ranges north of Chihuahua. And in the 1960s, there were only 30 left. There was a rumor that a farmer once blamed a bear for eating all of his cattle, and he started a campaign to end the subspecies once and for all. Unfortunately, in 1964, the last wild one was shot, and they were never seen in Mexico again. Our number 3 spot is another bird species. This bird was related to the grouse and was native to the coastal shores of North America from New Hampshire to Virginia. This is the Heath hen, or Typanicus cupido. The Heath hen, like the passenger pigeon, was used mostly as a cheap food source because they were so abundant. They were so common as a meat source that servants would actually bargain with their employers to not be fed the bird for more than 3 times a week. Due to increased hunting, the numbers of these birds declined rapidly. Now, they were ground-dwelling birds, so they fell victim to hunters, feral cats, and poachers. By the 1840s, they only existed on an island known as Martha's Vineyard off the coast of Massachusetts. By the 1890s, there was only 120 to 200 of them left. By the 1900s, there was only 70 left. But conservation efforts actually helped save these birds, and Martha's Vineyard became a sanctuary. By 1915, there were 2,000 birds on the island. And then a fire broke out and destroyed the breeding grounds. And then an unusually harsh winter, and then an increase of goshawk invasions, which are predatory birds. And by the 1920s, only 200 were left. And in 1921, a disease broke out from domesticated chickens that carried over onto the island, and then there was only 100 left. And then in 1927, only 13 of the birds remained. Heath hens were one of the first bird species that Americans were actively trying to save from extinction. In 1791, a law was passed for the preservation of heath hen and other bird game. That law was passed by the New York State legislature. Now, in the spring of 1929, a single survivor came back to the island, and the islanders named him Booming Ben due to the sound that grouse make when they're trying to attract mates. But sadly, Ben will be singing to no one ever again. Biologists trapped him and cuffed his leg with a metal band in order to find him if he were to get lost. But in March of 1932, Ben disappeared, never to be seen again. And with that, the Heath hen was declared extinct. Our number 2 spot is for the only modern species of the Penguinus genus, not to be confused with what we know as penguins, who are not closely related. They were actually discovered later by sailors who thought that they bore a striking resemblance to the great auk. The great auk was wanted for more than just their meat and their oil. They were wanted mostly for their feathers. Their feathers had made really great pillows back in the day, and companies really wanted them. In 1760, with the destruction of the eider duck, great auk feathers became more and more in demand. Companies would send sailors out onto Funk Island in order to capture these birds. And unfortunately, that brought in their eventual destruction. By the mid-16th century, nesting colonies were actually eliminated by humans using their feathers as down. In 1553 was when the first protection law passed to help these birds out, and in 1794, Great Britain prohibited any hunting of these animals for their meat or their feathers. But unfortunately, hunting them for fishing bait was still permitted. 3 sailors from the island of St. Kilda found a great auk on one of their explorations. They tied the bird up, kept him on their ship for 3 days. On the 4th day, a massive storm came through, and the sailors originally thought that the bird was a witch. It was a bringer of storms. So they went and they stoned the bird to death, and which is one of the reasons why superstition can also play a role in the destruction of an animal. In June of 1844, sailors went over to the islands of the last remaining great auks. They went for a scientist who wanted the specimens. Unfortunately, they were the last 2 remaining auks ever. They had an egg between them. And the men took the auks and strangled them with their bare hands and smashed the egg under their foot. And because of that, it killed off the last of the great auks and drove an entire species to extinction. Our number 1 spot goes to an animal that went extinct just 2 weeks ago on January 1st, 2019. We're showcasing this animal to show that this is not something that happened decades ago, but extinctions are happening right now underneath our noses in the zoological world. This is the Hawaiian land snail, also known as a Chatinella apex fulva. One of the reasons why these snails went extinct was due to deforestation and the introduction to rosy wolf snails. Rosy wolf snails are Central American native snails that were brought to Hawaii in order to cull agricultural pests. Unfortunately, when they were brought in between the 1930s and the 1950s, they started eating 90% of the Hawaiian snails, and those snails had gone extinct. The snail mostly ate the buildup of fungus that grew on leaves. By doing this, the Hawaiian land snail helped reduce the abundance of single-strain fungi while increasing fungi diversity as a whole. They helped protect their host trees from a variety of diseases, and scientists believe that a healthy snail population could have prevented the disease that is wiping out native trees as we speak. Researchers from the University of Hawaii have tried desperately to find specimens to reintroduce into Hawaii's ecosystem, but after a massive search, they only found one. Most Hawaiian land snails are hermaphroditic, meaning that they do not require a mate to reproduce, but unfortunately, George was not so lucky. A Chatanella apex fulva was of a breed that required a mate, and as of his death on January 1st, 2019, no such partner could be found, and as of that date, a Chatanella apex fulva joins the many other species that scientists now believe to be extinct.
All the species we've covered today have gone extinct in the time humans have walked the earth. We're now aware of the responsibility that we hold to prevent tragedies like this from continuing to happen. Places like the Field Museum show what happens when we don't monitor our effect on the environment. Every species, from the smallest insect to the biggest whale, is important in its natural habitat, and the unnatural removal of any species can cause changes in its environment, sometimes altering the course of the land itself.
I hope you learned something from today's video, and I hope you join us in our mission to protect and conserve the animals and wildlife that we share a planet with. There is still hope in protecting our wildlife across the globe. We just need to put a little bit of effort into it. Thank you for joining us on Kiki's Fun Animal Countdown, and this is the end of January's Extinct Animal Month. We'll see you next time.